Hi, we continue in Genesis 43 with the family at an impasse. Judah having told his father, "We will not go back to Egypt unless we bring our younger brother," and Jacob refusing to allow him to go. And so that's where we are as this scene unfolds today. As you can see on the right side of the screen, we've been following in the green box the chiasm that starts in chapter 43, verse 1 to 14, which we're still on now, and follows all the way through chapter 45, parallel to the one we just completed in chapter 42. And it's not surprising that this moving back and forth from Canaan to Egypt follows a kind of chiastic shape, as we see the sending to Egypt, the arrival in Egypt, the audience in custody, the second audience, the departure, and the return to Jacob. And we see that 2 rounds of that, although this one is much extended, as we're seeing, over 3 chapters. There are a number of other elements of here that don't come up particularly in today's scene, so we'll look at those more as they come up. Also, we can look at the key words for our chapter, and today we're on these 2 little chiasms, and you can see that the boxes are a series of little chiasms in this section, mostly A, B, C, and the first 3 all have the interesting element that the center one is all a conditional response. If you will send our brother with us, that's what we saw last time. Today, with Judah speaking here, this one doesn't have the, it does. If we had not delayed, we would have returned twice. And then Jacob saying, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So all those containing conditional. And you can see how tight the chiasm is in the second one. Take double silver in your hand, and they took double silver in their hand. Take your brother also, and they took Benjamin. And then this one is the chiastic around the parallels of the opposite speech. Judah said to his father Israel, then their father Israel said to them. And both around the sending and what they take. So that's where we are in our story. And what we're going to see here is there are a number of interesting parallels and echoes of things we've seen earlier in Genesis. It ought not to surprise us that the relationship between Joseph and his brothers is parallel in many ways to Jacob and his brother Esau. We'll see an example of that today. We'll also see an example that will set up what we'll see more in the next chapter of the parallels with Jacob and Laban as between Joseph and his brothers here. And there are also parallels with Abram's call, as we saw last time, with that phrase at the beginning of chapter 43, and the famine was severe, kabod in Hebrew, in the land, in the identical phrase at the beginning of chapter 12, not in the beginning of chapter 12, and 12:10, that sets Abram and Sarai to go to Egypt during the famine. And so certainly that parallel there as well. But we'll look more closely at a parallel that isn't as obvious, but it is there. And there's also a very explicit parallel to the beginning of the Joseph story. So the writers are expecting us to be literate in the whole book of Genesis and to be paying close intratextual attention, which is to say texts inside the book of Genesis, as opposed to intertextual texts between Genesis and another book like Exodus, etc. So let's just jump right into our scene. And as we do, before we look at my note, I want to note something curious here. Then Judah said to his father Israel. And we know this, of course, in the context of Judah being the 4th-born son of Leah and the only one left of Leah's children, the older children, who's competent to engage in the conversation here. And we certainly know Israel as Jacob, who's been described as Jacob. He'll be described as Father Israel here. And again, chiastically in verse 11, one of the only other places he's called that. But we obviously can also note that Judah and Israel were the names of the 2 polities, the 2 nations that grappled with each other, that were only temporarily united under the reign of David and Solomon, and then were separate. And Israel was destroyed as a nation with the Assyrian conquest in the 8th century BCE, and later becomes known as Samaria for the capital city there. But certainly Israel remains the best name for the people, as the obvious 20th century choice to describe a newly created Jewish homeland as Israel and not as Judah. So that's certainly the core essence. And we might ask the question here, is there a symbolic element to Israel sending a message or a present through Judah to Egypt? I'll just let that thought sit there, and we can see what that might play out as we go. So let's read the verse, and then we'll look at the note down below. So Judah says to his father Israel, trying to break the lock here, "Send the boy with me, and let us be on our way, so that we may live and not die, you and we, and also our little ones." And the note below actually is about his whole speech. So let's finish the whole speech and we'll go back. "I myself will be surety for him. You can hold me accountable for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we now would have returned twice." And as my note has, Judah's offer to be held responsible for the fate of Benjamin is surrounded by the life and death situation and the price of further delay, the death of the entire family. It's echoed by Jacob's speech in the next few verses, and that's part of the chiastic parallel. As Kraut notes, virtually every clause in Judah's statement in 43:8-10 resounds with meaningful echoes of earlier episodes from his and Jacob's lives, and we're going to look at a couple of those as we go here. So, send the boy with me, Hana'ar here. We saw earlier he was described as a yeled in 42:22, which is really a child. Na'ar can be a young man, or it can also mean a status as someone who's subservient working for somebody else, not quite as a slave. But it's previously used in the story only regarding Joseph in 37:2 and 41:12, and now Benjamin takes over that role. So he continues, and let us be on our way here, a phrase that we see a number of times, so that we may live and not die, echoing Jacob's words in the last chapter, and Joseph's also in chapter 42. We'll see it similarly in chapter 47. You and we, and also our little ones. And so establishing some family solidarity here, especially given the previous scene where Judah said, I will not go for you and buy for you unless you send Benjamin. So now they're all in it. And the reference to little ones here, the unusual word here, gam tapenu, and the root taf, as Westermann notes, is often used for children and resonates with pity for their plight. But it also resonates with Reuben's stupid offer in the previous scene to say, if I don't bring Benjamin back, you, my father, can kill 2 of my children. In other words, Jacob's grandsons, these very little ones. So certainly there must be a sense of an echo here that Judah's saying, I will not allow our little ones to die as my stupid brother Reuben might have done. And we don't hear about Reuben again. Let's look at some more details of this that echo here. As Kraut notes, as part of this reflection story on Jacob's earlier behavior in 31:9 and 10. We're going to look more at that as we go. And I note here that you can see on the right side in my translation that the New RSV, for whatever reason, leaves out all these body parts, feet, hands, and face. And I'd like to put those back in because the Hebrew is much more bodily explicit about those things than the English of the New RSV is. So we can see here that I will seek his hand, set him before your face, etc. So the word for surety here from Erev here is again at 44:32, and it's a hidden wordplay with Erev, which can be a mixture of other things, but also of people. So Judah becomes mixed up with the fate of Benjamin. But it's also a callback to Judah's pledge to Tamar. Let's look back at that. And as my note below has, Kraut suggests an ABBA chiasm between the 2 verses in Hebrew. I won't get down to that level, but just to note here. So Judah says here, I will be surety for him, or a pledge, and you can hold me accountable. But back here, this is Tamar saying to Judah, I will send you a kid, which is to say a she-goat or a little goat, from the flock, only if you give me a pledge. The same word there. And isn't that interesting? Because the kid can also recall the goat's blood that the brothers put on Joseph's coat, but it can also suggest symbolically that what's happening here is that she's saying to him, give me a pledge and I'll give you a child of a goat. And what he's doing, of course, in our immediate scene is saying to his father, I will be the pledge for your youngest child. So many levels of parallel there around Judah. And he continues, then you can hold me accountable. And that brings another element up, this exact phrase we find here. In 31:39, when Jacob is giving his accounting to Laban after their confrontation, that we see in this scene that I put right above it, which is parallel to the scene we'll see here in chapter 44 in endless ways, as you can see from all the color coding. So I don't want to get distracted by those now. We'll look at those when we get there. But you can see down here, although the New RSV translates them radically differently, the phrase in Hebrew is exactly the same. Here, you can hold me accountable, and back in 31, of my hand you required it. And yad here is the word for hand, so that's why it's part of the hand element. And as my notes below has, this phrase is only in these scenes in Genesis, the pink ones, as are all these others that we'll look at when we get there. So another of the many parallels, Judah now parallel in that way as Jacob was to Laban. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before your face, then let me bear the blame. Or it could be sin, hatat there. I think that NORSV doesn't translate it as sin, and I don't either, because there's no evocation of God by anybody here. So in that sense, it seems to have, if you will, the secular sense of blame. But it's echoing a couple of other elements, including what we just saw in 42:22, where it was Reuben who was going to take that on, sharply contrasting with Reuben's offer. Forever is literally all the days, so that's why I translated it that way over here. Then he adds, expressing the sense of urgency, and Kraut notes the parallel with 31:42, which is also part of that same scene. If we had not delayed here, and the word for delay is only here in Genesis 7 times in Hebrew Scripture, we would now have returned twice. But the word for twice, ayim, here literally means feet, in the sense of a pair of feet, and hence as a euphemism for twice. So hands, feet, and face, all in those couple of verses. How much is there a hurry here? They're out of food, but they didn't obviously get suddenly out of food. The food is diminished as they go. And as I've been noting, it's not that they have no food. They have no grain. But this family are shepherds, and so they have plenty to eat. They have milk and yogurt from the goats, and they have the goats and presumably cows themselves, because we've seen they have sheep and goats and cattle, all of which are obviously domesticated to be edible and to provide milk, both from the goats and the sheep, and if they have cows as well. And we certainly saw that when Abram and Sarai provided food for the visitors in chapter 18. Although they did make cakes from grain, they also provided a fatted calf. So there's certainly not a shortage of food. They're not about to starve here, and it doesn't seem like there's an immediate hurry. But notice what's not discussed in any element of the hurry is bringing back Simeon, who's been there for however long this is. I'm assuming just for the purpose of this that it's a year, that they would have gotten a year's worth of grain, but we don't know that. But whatever it is, it's been a long period of time, and he's not mentioned at all. So that's Judah's attempt to convince him, and then we hear the response from the father Israel in the chiastic parallel. So, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bag, the zimra, only here in Genesis, and otherwise the meaning can mean song or something that's praised, so it doesn't mean fruit as such. But as my note below has, in taking these fruits to Egypt, Jacob orders them ironically to play the role of Ishmaelites, but offering a gift, not trading. And that's why we're going to see the parallel in just a moment. So, choice fruits of the land in your bags, and carry them down as a minha to the man. And as you can see from here, I didn't make a chart of this. Minha is only 3 contextual places in Genesis. In Jacob trying to offer it to his brother Esau after they're alienated, and he hears that Esau is coming with 400 men, and we see it 5 times in that encounter. And now 4 times in our immediate scene. The only other time is Cain and Abel, right at the beginning of our story here. And so my note below is about the question I was raising about a symbolic meaning of Israel sending Judah into Egypt with a minha. I don't have an answer for that. You can be with that yourself. And so Jacob certainly knows that minha was the word that he used in trying to reconcile with Esau. He doesn't know it's Joseph. And he certainly knows his son is there, but he's not out of good relationship with Simeon as far as we know, although the last time we saw Simeon and Jacob, Jacob was accusing Simeon and his brother Levi of making Jacob's name stink around here for causing such violence to the Shechemites. Whether that's still in their mind however many years later is another question, but it's at least 20-something years later, because that was before the 20 years that Joseph's been in Egypt. So whether he has that in mind or not, we can't know. And then we hear the to the man, which is the key word that the way Joseph is called throughout, as we see the man, the man, the man. And then we see these things, and let's look at them in some detail. But first, before we do, let's notice that balm, gum, and resin are an exact match of 37:25 here. Then the brothers sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it to Egypt. But in the end, what happens is they say, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh, and the brothers agreed. So they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. So the Ishmaelites go down to Egypt with 20 pieces of silver, carrying gum, balm, and resin, exactly as the brothers will do now, with their silver, their gum, their balm, their resin, along with a little honey, some pistachio nuts, and almonds. Jacob, of course, doesn't know any of that. We call that a karmic matching. Jacob doesn't know either that Joseph was sold to the Ishmaelites. The brothers made it look like he was dead, or obviously that the Ishmaelites were carrying all that. Not to mention that Ishmaelites are extended family, but we won't deal with that issue exactly. Let's look at our notes on some of the details here. So as my notes suggest, the list suggests they're not totally on the edge of death, but these are mostly not food. And as Wenham notes, from the Ishmaelites, Joseph's brothers received money. Now they are carrying money back to Egypt, much like I was saying. Botanically, balm is from the balsamodendron, which is simply to say a balsam tree or a balsam shrub, and it's used for healing purposes. There is a balm in Gilead. A little honey, don't need to explain that. They're in the land of milk and honey. Gum here, which is Hebrew lot, which could also be translated as myrrh. It's made from the leaves of the Cistus velocis, the rock rose plant. Resin, Nicothah here, which could be a number of things, but most scholars think it's most likely from the astrologus plant, so a resin from that. Pistachio nuts, which are not native to the immediate area, they're native to Central Asia to the east, and were cultivated by the Persian Empire. It's only here in the entire Masoretic text. And almonds, which are interestingly used symbolically in Numbers for Aaron's staff breaking into an almond branch that blooms, and in Jeremiah in a vision. And in Ecclesiastes, it's more generic for nuts. In the ancient times, almonds were wild, and they were domesticated in the early Bronze Age in the Near East, but found in King Tut's tomb. So almonds are associated with Egypt as well. Whether they have a particular other meaning here, it's hard to know. But almonds and pistachios are the only elements of food here. Are we to see these as things that are hunted and gathered, or in this case, obviously gathered, as opposed to agriculture? We certainly have never seen Jacob farming here, and these are not farm things now. We don't sense that he's in the pistachio and almond business. The Ishmaelites were trading for those things, but however Jacob has those, he's simply offering them as a sweetener, much like bringing somebody a bouquet of roses or something when you go over their house, or a bottle of wine for dinner. And so having given those things, now he says, take double the money. And again, the Norse covers up hand and return, both twice in the verse. So we can see that here. Take double silver in your hand and return the silver in the mouth of your sack, return by hand. So 2 hands and a mouth there. So that's my note there. Double, Kesef Mishnah, and so Mishnah twice there. As Sarna notes, with the additional money reference in the sentence, ambiguous whether it suggests a double compensation or a double purchase of food on this trip. But it certainly suggests double money because they're taking the money back that was returned and enough to pay for more. And that's what he says as he completes the sentence. Carry back or return with you the money that's returned, hence a double return, in the mouth of your sack. Perhaps it was an oversight, a meshuggah, which curiously, for someone like me raised with a grandmother who spoke Yiddish all the time, meshuggah is one of those Yiddish words for someone who's mixed up. Here it's defined formally as an oversight or a mistake. And then, notice how he frames this. Take your brother with you, talking about Benjamin, but not naming him, but saying your brother. Not my son, but your brother, trying to establish the family relationship there. Also, and be on your way again to the man. And then he offers this little blessing along the way in terms of El Shaddai. And it's interesting, I won't make a chart of this, and we can just look at it from my note. The occurrences of El Shaddai earlier. To Abraham in chapter 17, that's precisely when he becomes Abraham at the covenant of superstition. In chapter 28, in Isaac's blessing to Jacob, the very fatherly blessing that Jacob stole from Esau, that then he's trying to return in the scene where there's the minhah. In chapter 35, spoken to Jacob by God, where he's named Israel for the second time there. So I am God Almighty, El Shaddai, and you are Israel. Then in our immediate scene, and then in chapter 48, recalling the encounter around Rachel's death. And then we recognize that El Shaddai in 35 is associated with the moment of Rachel's death, which is the birth of Benjamin. And so many recollections here. Is Jacob consciously doing that to recall the moment when Benjamin was born and his beloved wife Rachel died? It's hard to know. It's also in Exodus 6:3, interestingly, as a recollection of God saying, I appeared to Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I'm now appearing to you as Yahweh. So whether that recalls all those things in Jacob's mind, we don't know. The brothers certainly don't know all that unless Jacob has told them the family story. So he continues, grant you mercy, rakamim, or compassion. It's only one other time in Genesis, although 40 times in Hebrew scripture, before the man, so he may send back your other brother and Benjamin. So now Simeon is referred to for the only time here, and Benjamin is named out loud. And it's interesting that Jacob makes that distinction. Not Simeon and Benjamin, or not your two brothers, but your other brother and Benjamin. But he ends on the kind of note that we see Jacob consistently engaging in here, feeling sorry for himself. As for me, if I'm bereaved of my children, I'm bereaved. Or Westerman makes it, translates it more immediately. I am bereaved. And so Jacob is bereaved. The brothers go off, and as we'll see before the next verse is over, they're standing before Joseph again. We'll see how he responds to their return of presents next time. See you then. Bye-bye.